But for those who missed that, which I thought was a great program, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Community Medicine.
Certainly. Well, I've been an occupational therapist at Community on the rehab unit since 1989. And so I work on the rehab unit with folks that have sustained either traumatic brain injuries, strokes, possibly other diagnoses. But I also run a program called Heads Up that goes out into the schools and educates kids about the dangers of risk-taking behavior and why they should not hurt their brain and their spinal cord. So that's another side part of what I do. But I'm happy to come back because we ran out of time. And I had a lot more information to share, so this is good.
Cool.
So how do you what's the 101 class look like for don't engage in risky behavior?
The 101 class looks like learning about the anatomy of your brain and your spinal cord, how fragile it is, some basic common sense ways to protect it, and then we launch into risk-taking behavior, diving off of bridges or diving into areas that you don't know what's underneath the water. Obviously, seatbelt and helmet use, just average risk-taking behavior that most kids engage in, especially teenagers, but also just educating them that injury is the number one, traumatic brain injury is the number one killer of anybody in our country from age 14 to 24.
The most common risky behavior I engaged in as a child that age was wrestling with my friends, fighting, or playing tackle football. Of course, we were padless, just playing with the Nerf football or whatever out in the grass. But apparently, people that suffer the most, the football players that suffer the most, are those that had played tackle football before the age of 12.
I had read that as well. Yeah.
And
in terms of just the shock to their brain.
And I guess my question was, I've always been led to believe that babies were rubber, that they were designed basically so that if they fell, they got hurt, injured, that they would be able to bounce right back up and take the hits and keep on going. But apparently there's a little bit more fragility when it comes to the brain at that age.
A lot more fragility. Well, at any age, but definitely at that age. Very definitely. So the brain is indeed real fragile. The human body is amazing with the forces that it can withstand, but the brain not so much.
So should I wrap my boys in saran wrap until they reach 13 and then push them out the door?
I mean, I think of the stuff that I did too. I mean, my brother would dare me to jump off of garages, and I would do it. I mean, kids do risky things, and they're testing their limits all the time, and you have to live. But we're learning more and more about how we can protect ourselves.
Let me ask you a little about the brain, because you and I talked quite at length about the movie Concussion that came out recently.
Yes.
And one of the things I've learned in visiting with medical professionals like you is that the human brain, especially in men, does not really come to maturity until probably into their late 20s or early 30s, as far as developing into the common sense, being able to make wise choices.
Your frontal lobe.
Or in our case, it never comes to maturity, period.
Remember, you're only the one who can be immature forever. But
Yes,
anyway,
yes.
So when it comes to things like football or soccer or whatever, I have noted that many of the little peewee leagues have eliminated the kickoff.
Yes.
Because that is the one where there's the most violent hits. Is people running at long distances right at each other. Boom, and even though it's fun for the fans, it's not so good for the brain.
Yeah, those are the most violent hits. I had recently heard about that as well, and when I heard it, in a way, it kind of made me sad. It might take a little bit away from the sport for the kids, but that is more protective. It is of the young ones. Yeah. That kind of leads into just the fragility of the brain. What I really wanted to talk about, you had already mentioned just a few minutes ago that we're coming up on Memorial Day, and all of the safety folks talk about how this is the beginning of the 100 deadly days of summer, especially on our roads. And when I was here last time, I talked about how from 2000 to 2011, we saw accident rates go down in Montana, but since 2011, they're coming back up. And we kind of discussed that. We talked about how the economy maybe assisted that in terms of people driving less miles, and especially teenagers. The GDL, the Graduated Driving License Program, has really worked well to help make young, beginning teenage drivers better and more supervised. But a lot of what's happening since 2011, the experts are becoming more and more convinced, is cell phone use. So that was one of the really big things I wanted to talk about today.
I wanted to ask you about the drivers out there. Some people might say, hey, it's the older baby boom generation becoming worse drivers, or they blame it on the young kids with their cell phones. Which driving group? Is it still those teenagers? Are they still the biggest threat?
Statistically speaking, anyone that has just learned to drive up until the age of about 24, 26, when that frontal lobe matures, as you were saying, Peter, they have, statistically speaking, the most accident rates. The second group are folks 80 and up. The third group, though, fast catching up, are middle-aged folks like us who are on their cell phones. You know, most of us drive about an average of 15,500 miles a year. And so if you do that for 50 years, that's like a lifetime of driving, you have a 1 in 100 chance of dying behind the wheel if you drive that many miles for 50 years.
And that's the average?
That's the average. That's the average statistic. Every year, the number of highway deaths that we see in the United States, it would be as if a 100-passenger plane crashed and killed everybody every day. That's how many fatalities are out on our roads. And, I mean, people just, are freaked out when planes go down, but our highway accidents are the equivalent of a 100-passenger plane going down every single day. I'd like to summarize the latest research a little bit, but it's really, it's pretty negative, and a lot of...
We're coming up against a break.
You bet.
So let's save the negativity. All right. No, seriously, Becca Robertson joining us. If you're sitting in line right now, trying to get out of Lolo into Missoula, you're late for work, and slow driver. So you might be getting a little bit frustrated. Maybe you can speak to them when we come back. Okay?
Sure.
We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Let's get Mark on the line. Mark, you're on with Becca Robertson from Community Medical Center. Hi.
Hi, Becca and gentlemen.
What's up?
I'm glad you brought up the point, Becca, that middle-aged people are affected by it too. And a little incident happened to me when I first got my first cell phone in 2006. I was at the two-way on Russell and West Broadway, the two-way turn, there by McDonald's and the car wash. And I got my first phone call while I was driving. I was talking. The light was red, then it changed to green. And I'm glad that the people behind me were paying attention, because I was talking on the cell phone, and I drifted over into the right-hand lane, but they honked and stopped, thank goodness. So I still do have my State Farm no-accident discount. But ever since then, I said, no more talking on the cell phone unless I'm a passenger.
I'm really glad that the other drivers were alert. Yeah, definitely.
It takes a village to drive and talk on a cell phone.
Well, that last caller, Mark, is a really good example of what you experience when you're on the cell phone. And there's 3 different types of distraction. There's, eyes off the road distraction. There's using your hands, a manual distraction. But it's the third distraction, the cognitive distraction, that we're not aware of. Our own brain doesn't keep track of it. So I'm going to summarize the latest research, because this is what a lot of people are just appalled to hear. And I have some resources. If folks are interested, maybe you can put them up on your website, because there are wonderful resources out there. Whether you're a Mythbusters kind of person, you like to see it acted out on TV, whether you like to read books, whether you like to look at scientific journals, the latest research from everybody, National Safety Council, NHTSA, that's the National Highway Traffic Safety Association, AAA, neuroscientists, lots of universities, even insurance companies. They all agree with what I'm about to say. So there's no difference in your impairment between driving drunk, driving drowsy. Now, when you drive drowsy, you nod off, and you have a 2 to 4 second period that they're calling microsleep, and then you wake back up, or using cell phones. So I want to repeat that. There's no difference. The impairment is across the board the same, according to all of these studies, between drunk driving, drowsy driving, and cell phone use. And here's the appalling part. It doesn't matter whether you're using a hands-free or a handheld cell phone. the distraction is still the same.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's bad news for many, many, many drivers out there. But all three of these cause decreased reaction times, decreased central and peripheral vision, just the type of things that Mark was talking about, the caller before, impaired judgment, and you're just not able to process information. You know, we all think that we're great drivers. We all think that we can multitask, but we talked about this before. The brain doesn't really multitask. It flits back and forth, so you pay attention to the road, you pay attention to your call. One of the big, really impressive studies that they did was they took 200 long-haul truckers. So these guys are the pros, right? I mean, they know what to do. They put them on video cameras, and they compared them with handheld and hands-free or voice-text phones. And again, the appalling thing was that even when the truck drivers had their eyes on the road and they were using a hands-free cell phone and just talking, they had 4 to 6 second periods where they did not see what was ahead of them. It's actually called inattention blindness. Drivers look at something, but they don't see it. And again, our brains just can't process separate streams of information efficiently, and so our brains naturally tag on to the voice because we know the words are going to disappear. Whereas with just looking at down the road and visual information, your brain kind of knows that you can check and double check. So as soon as you get on the phone, blood leaves the visual part of your brain and it goes to the auditory, pay attention to the phone call side of your brain, and all of a sudden, you're more impaired.
I have that problem. Well, we all have that problem with our husband's advice. We call it selective hearing loss.
Yes.
All right. Tell you what. Let's get Mike on the line. Mike,
You're on Talkback with Becca Robertson. Hi.
Yeah, well, I'm listening to this, and it's always talking on the phone, cell phone, and stuff. It looks to me like if what she just said, you're talking to somebody and you don't see the 3 to 5 seconds, wouldn't there have been a humongous amount of crashes in the CB days when everybody had a CB? The only difference was they had to hold the mic in their front of their face. And everybody, and I didn't know anyone that didn't have a CB. Everybody and their dog had one. Yeah, everybody had one. So there should have, somewhere along the line, I'm not disputing her findings, but somebody, somewhere along the line, there should have been a huge spike when the CVs took off, and nobody has ever mentioned that.
Yeah,
thanks, Mike.
You're right, Mike. You're right. Thanks for that call. Nobody has ever mentioned that, and not only CB, not only talking on CBs, but also just taking your eyes off the road when people first began to be able to play cassettes and then CDs in their cars. There are a lot of things that distract us. I can't dispute the latest research. You would think that there would have been a huge number of wrecks. I'm not really sure, that happened or didn't, but I think we would have heard about it if it did. That's a really good point. Some of that latest research, though, again, I hear your skepticism a little bit, Mike, and a lot of people are skeptical. A lot of people that are on their phones all the time. I talk to people who say, hey, I'm on I-90, I'm traveling to Butte. It's a great time to get on the phone, straight stretch, not a lot of hazards. I get on the phone and I get a lot of work done. I think a lot of us do that day after day after day, and we get away with it.
Are we pressing our luck?
I think we are pressing our luck according to the latest information. We are. We definitely are. Back to that inattention blindness with drivers looking at but not seeing. I'm thinking too, Mike, the last caller, that it's finally beginning to be studied, and they put people behind the wheel and they also put them in simulations, and they're doing brain scans at the same time. So all of a sudden we're being flooded with all of this information that actually shows us that when you listen to someone, when you're an active listener and you're listening to someone speaking on the phone, the parietal lobe part of your brain, that's the part of your brain that judges distance and speed, the blood flow leaves it, becomes diminished in that area and moves to the listening part of your brain. But there's more. When a human being plans to say something and then actually says it, that puts 4 times as many demands on your brain. And if you're doing that while you're driving, again, it's not that you can't do it, it's that it takes away from the most important part of your brain, your visual cortex part of your brain, when you're driving.
Is the more important the conversation you're in,
The more an active listener you are, yes.
And the more is sucked out of your brain to do that, as opposed to concentrating on your driving. Oh, we're going to take a break. Come right back. Stay with us. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-530. And I will be right back. Hey, we're back. And this is Health Talk. I'm Peter Christian. That's John King. Joining us here in the studio, Becca Robertson, occupational therapist at Community Medical Center. And boy, everybody wants to talk with you. So let's get right back to the phone. Brian, you're on with Becca Robertson. Hi.
Hi. How are you? I understand that driving can distract people. When they're talking on the phone. But it's more the worst thing I ever see is the people that text and drive. Now, the other thing is I'm a pilot also. And I'm going to tell you right now that when you're listening on the headphones in an airplane, it's not necessarily easy to understand what the towers are saying. And you have to learn to multitask.
Yeah.
That's all I can tell you. And I can guarantee you are listening hard. You are listening hard when you're trying to understand what the tower is trying to tell you and where to be.
Oh, I'm sure. Those are two really good comments. Texting.
Thanks for your call.
Those are two really good comments. Texting is introduces the manual component, so it's pretty hard to text without looking at what you're doing. A lot of teenagers feel like they have a system. They either just drop their eyes down really fast, or they put their cell phone into a place where they can text and just divert their eyes briefly.
Wow.
Systems like that are very, very dangerous. And also too, Brian's comment about when he was a pilot and had to really actively listen to directions from the tower. That's just a really good example. Most of us, as we're driving, aren't getting that kind of serious content in the messages that we're getting. But cognitively, if someone is talking to you and it's just idle chatter, it's not quite as distracting. But as soon as they introduce numbers or any kind of memory component, like if they're saying, hey, I'm at this number, call me, or if they're asking you, what date do you want to go up to Whitefish, as soon as the numbers and the memory component gets in, then it becomes even more of a brain drain.
Let's get another call. Debbie, you're on with Becca Robertson. Hi.
Hi.
We have exactly 2 minutes. Go.
Oh, I was just thinking, just a quick comment again on brain distraction is listening to books on like CD while driving.
Yes.
Can be.
Sorry, Peter.
I love that.
I love doing that too, but I can understand where it could be, you're watching the road, but you're connected to the story too.
Debbie, I'm really glad.
Thanks, Debbie.
I'm really glad that you brought that up because I actually am holding in my hands right now. The AAA recently came out with a cognitive distraction scale. So I'm going to start with the least distracting and move up. So driving with no distractions, listening to the radio. Third is the audio book, unfortunately, because your brain is paying attention to what is being said. So again, it's diverting the power from the part of your brain that needs to visually focus on what you're doing. Next is intense passenger talk. Not chat, but just if you're having a pretty intense conversation and you're actively listening to your passenger. Then next come the cell phones, handheld and hands-free.
Together,
exactly the same. Then comes voice texting, because human beings, we're really unique in that when we talk, we visualize. So when you're on a phone conversation, you're not just talking, you're visualizing a little bit about what you're saying. Then finally are the memorization and math tasks that come in. So all of those are really distractible.
All right. We are almost completely out of time. Give us some contact information, Rebecca, so that we can, find out more about what you do.
Absolutely. If anybody wants some of the resources that I've talked about today and summarized, my email is rrobertson, ROBERTSON, @communitymed.org. And I'm also going to ask that Peter and John post some resources on their website. There's some fantastic things out there.
We'll do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Always a
Appreciate
pleasure to
it.
see you. Have a happy Memorial Day weekend.
Same to you.
Drive safe, everybody. We'll be right back.